The silk of the emperor's robes still shimmered in the fading light of the capital, a deceptive veneer draped over a crumbling world. Outside the opulent yet now feverishly tense court halls of the later Han Dynasty, the air itself tasted of ash and desperation. The sound of distant skirmishes muffled by the city walls was the perpetual drumbeat of collapse. It was a chaotic rhythm that had replaced the measured cadence of imperial order. This was a time when the common man had forgotten what it meant to walk without fear. The only certainty was the inevitability of change, and the only question was who would ride the tide of destruction to build a new shore. This chaotic epoch known as the Nan-Shi, or the Chaotic Times, was not merely a period of political turmoil. It was a sensory onslaught that fundamentally rewired the collective psyche of the Middle Kingdom. Imagine the visual landscape. Once orderly rice fields were now desolate wastes. Scarred by the hasty passage of armies and the burning flares of peasant revolts. The colors of the imperial court had been replaced by the dull, desperate ochre of the yellow turban rebels, staining the countryside with their apocalyptic vision. The grand roads built for the swift movement of decrees and tribute were choked with refugees. Their eyes were wide with the terror of displacement, carrying their few possessions in bundles tied with frayed rope. The auditory environment was defined by its unpredictable violence. One moment there was the unnatural silence of a famine-stricken village, broken only by the thin, rasping cough of the sick. The next, the terrifying cacophony of cavalry charges, the screaming of war horses, the frantic clang of bronze meeting iron, and the shrieks of the dying. The scent of the era was overwhelmingly visceral, a mixture of stale sweat, unwashed bodies, rotting grain, and the metallic tang of fresh blood that never seemed to dissipate from the wind. To touch the world of the later Han was to feel roughness. It was the coarse hemp clothes of the peasantry, the cold, unforgiving steel of a soldier's spear, and the gritty dust kicked up by marching columns. Food, when available, was often the bitter, bland taste of wild roots or insufficient rations. This was a constant reminder that the grand civilized order which once promised stability had dissolved into mere survival. In this furnace of fragmentation, where the mandate of heaven seemed to have vanished into thin air, a deeper, more fundamental question emerged. This question echoes across 2 millennia and resonates in the boardrooms and political arenas of the 21st century. How does one navigate absolute chaos? Is survival dependent on ruthless pragmatism, or can genuine virtue still carve a path to enduring power? Must a leader betray their moral compass to restore order, or can the restoration of order only be achieved through steadfast, unwavering idealism? The enduring answer, the playbook for living and leading in the abyss, was captured not merely in historical records but in a sprawling, magnificent narrative crafted centuries later. This was Luo Guanzhong's Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This single seminal text transformed 60 years of brutal warfare, political maneuvering, and societal transformation. It became a cultural catechism, a living study of statecraft, strategy, and the very nature of human ambition. This epic is built upon the towering shoulders of its protagonists, men whose choices define the trajectory of an entire civilization. There is Liu Bei, the humble weaver of straw mats who claims descent from the imperial line. His power is rooted entirely in rende, meaning benevolence and moral charisma. His journey is the pursuit of legitimacy through righteousness, an impossible path demanding unwavering conviction. Arrayed around him are his sworn brothers, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, the embodiments of absolute loyalty and ferocious courage. This is a triumvirate forged in the sacred commitment of the Peach Garden Oath. Standing in stark contrast is Cao, the undisputed master of northern China, a genius of strategy and a cold-eyed pragmatist. He is the Machiavellian archetype centuries before Machiavelli. He famously stated his preference to wrong the world rather than have the world wrong him. Cao understood that in a time of collapse, efficiency, resource management, and decisive action trumped sentimental idealism. His path was one of cold, hard realism, the swift establishment of control through legalist methodology. The story of the three kingdoms, Wei, Shu, and Wu, is the story of these competing philosophies. It is an eternal dialectic between the rule of virtue and the rule of might. It is a transition period not just militarily, but ideologically, where the rigid Confucian ideals of the preceding centuries were brutally tested by the necessity of immediate survival and the practical demands of governance in a broken state. The lessons embedded within this narrative, often layered with 30% fiction to enhance their dramatic power and accessibility, are not relics of the past. They are foundational wisdom for anyone seeking to understand the dynamics of power, loyalty, and human failure. Let's explore how this initial chaos led to the rise of these legendary figures, and how their contrasting methods laid the foundation for an entire civilization's strategic understanding. The stage for this grand drama was set by the protracted decline of the later Han Dynasty, a decay rooted deep in institutional rot. We can trace the causal chain of the empire's demise, beginning not with external invasion but with internal self-consumption. The deep cause was the structural contradiction inherent in the centralized imperial system. The perennial power struggle between the external kin of the empress and the palace eunuchs. The emperors, often young and weak, became mere puppets, shifting their allegiance between these two equally greedy factions, each vying for control of the administrative machinery. This continuous cycle of infighting paralyzed central authority. The immediate trigger, however, was socioeconomic collapse. For decades, powerful local magnates and aristocratic families had relentlessly annexed land, driving vast numbers of independent farmers into tenancy or, worse, destitution. This mass displacement created an enormous, angry, and economically volatile underclass ready for revolution. When the spiritual fervor of the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a millenarian Taoist movement promising a great peace, erupted in the year 184, the weakened imperial military proved incapable of stamping it out swiftly. The short-term effect was the sudden, radical decentralization of power. To combat the rebels, the Han court was forced to grant regional governors and local strongmen enormous military and administrative autonomy. These warlords, having crushed the initial peasant threat, quickly realized their newfound power exceeded that of the central government. They refused to relinquish control, transforming the landscape from a unified empire into a fragmented map of competing domains. This was the Qingxing Jiju, or the era of warlords vying for supremacy. The long-term consequence was the institutionalizing of chaos. For 60 years, the notion of a single, unifying emperor was destroyed. New administrative models, new strategies for production, and new military technologies were tested in this crucible. The period became a laboratory for governance, demonstrating that political legitimacy could be derived from military might and pragmatic management, rather than solely from the ancestral mandate of the Han House. This was the environment that incubated men like Liu Bei, Cao, and Sun Quan. The crucial concept underpinning the legitimacy of all these rising forces was the mandate of heaven, or Tianming. In classical Chinese philosophy, the mandate was the cosmic justification for imperial rule. The emperor, the son of heaven, ruled only so long as he ruled justly and benevolently. If he lost virtue, heaven would withdraw its approval, signaling its displeasure through natural disasters, famine, and rebellion. The Yellow Turban Rebellion was, in the eyes of many, the ultimate proof that the Han Dynasty had squandered its mandate. But what happens when the mandate is lost? It does not simply descend upon the strongest warrior. It must be claimed through an elaborate performance of destiny and virtue. For Cao, claiming the mandate was a matter of ruthless pragmatism and decisive action. He famously secured the person of Emperor Xian, the last Han Emperor, in the year 196 and moved the capital to Zhuge. By placing the figurehead of the Han state under his effective control, Cao could issue edicts in the emperor's name. This granted him a veneer of legitimacy and a massive strategic advantage. He commanded the Han resources, the Han bureaucracy, and the nominal loyalty of any subject still adhering to the imperial ideal. Cao's approach was essentially legalist, tempered by his own military genius. His definition of the mandate was rooted in effective governance, high production, and a disciplined, strong military. He prioritized efficiency and order over moral purity. Understanding that a starving populace cares more for grain than for empty pronouncements of virtue. His concrete visualization of power was the Tuntian system. These state-run military agricultural colonies were established across his territory, ensuring the army was fed and the economy stabilized. For him, the mandate was proven by results. However, Liu Bei offered a fundamentally different interpretation, one rooted purely in Confucian ideals. Liu Bei, though poor and lacking a power base, insisted on the principle of restoring the true Han lineage, emphasizing his own distant, humble connection to the imperial family. Liu Bei's definition of the mandate was ren de, or benevolence and righteousness. For Liu Bei, the mandate could only be reclaimed by demonstrating a moral purity superior to the cynical maneuvering of men like Cao. His concrete visualization was not a massive army or granary, but the famous oath of the Peach Garden, where he, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei swore to live and die together. They prioritized brotherhood, loyalty, and the restoration of the Han house above personal gain. The human perspective on this ideological clash was profound. The common people, ravaged by famine and war, were weary of the legalist-style efficiency that often came with brutal enforcement. They were drawn to Liu Bei's perceived authenticity and compassion, seeing him as a potential shepherd rather than a warlord. This devotion was not strategic, it was existential. When Liu Bei had to flee, masses of civilians willingly followed him, enduring tremendous hardship. They were not just following a leader, they were following an ideal. This contrast became the central tension of the era. Cao's dominance was built on the undeniable strength of structure and intellect, while Liu Bei's resilience rested entirely on the spiritual force of moral legitimacy. To understand Liu Bei's philosophy fully, we need to delve deeper into the nature of renda. It is not simple charity, it is a profound ethical commitment that serves as a magnet for talent and loyalty. Its philosophical definition, drawn from Confucian thought, encompasses humaneness, compassion, and the embodiment of the highest moral principles. In the context of the chaotic times, renda became a strategic commodity. While material resources were scarce, moral capital was the ultimate resource, capable of inspiring loyalty that surpassed mere fear or monetary reward. Liu Bei defined himself by this pursuit, believing that the path to true legitimacy was paved with consistent, virtuous action. A specific visualization of this concept is perhaps best illustrated by the famous anecdote of the 3 visits to the thatched hut, or Sangu Cao Lu. Liu Bei, already a nobleman by reputation if not by territory, travels 3 times, enduring weather and waiting, simply to speak to the reclusive strategic genius, Zhuge Liang. This was not a quick hiring, it was a ritual of profound respect. He did not send a lower-ranked officer or demand Zhuge Liang's presence. Instead, he presented himself as a humble seeker of wisdom. This act cemented Liu Bei's reputation among the people. For the ambitious and supremely talented Zhuge Liang, seeing a powerful man of imperial lineage demonstrate such sincere humility was irresistible. It signaled that Liu Bei would treat his subordinates not as disposable assets, but as valued partners. Zhuge Liang was not won by money or threats, but by Liu Bei's manifest virtue. This act of renda won him the greatest strategic mind of the age, the man who would formulate the grand design of the Three Kingdoms division. Known as the Longjong Plan, this has clear modern relevance. In today's knowledge economy, where talent is mobile and scarce, leaders who prioritize genuine connection, humility, and long-term mentorship over transactional management are the ones who retain the best people. The water to my fish relationship Liu Bei formed with Zhuge Liang is the prototype for modern high-trust organizational culture, where loyalty is earned through character, not merely authority. Now let's examine Cao, whose genius lay in his unflinching embrace of strategic realism, often at the expense of Confucian ideals. Cao's strategy, built upon a foundation of meritocracy and decisive action, was essentially a rejection of the sentimental politics that had weakened the Han court. His core philosophy could be summarized as results justify the means. He saw the world not through the lens of moral ideals, but through the unforgiving geometry of power, resources, position, and military strength. A terrifyingly concrete visualization of this realism occurs during a hunt with Liu Bei. Cao, seeing the emperor's person becoming politically inconvenient, makes a pointed display of his true power. He wears the emperor's yellow hunting robes and accepts the tributes meant for the Son of Heaven. When Liu Bei, horrified by the blatant usurpation, draws his bow, Cao's psychological dominance is complete. Later at the capital, Cao famously invites Liu Bei to a casual discussion of heroes over plum wine during a thunderstorm. When Cao declares the only heroes in the world are you and I, the thunderclap is described as making Liu Bei drop his spoon. This was not out of actual fear of the storm, but because the cold calculation in Cao's eyes confirmed the threat. The psychological drama for Cao's subordinates was one of constant tension. They knew they served a brilliant, efficient master who would reward them handsomely for success. But they also knew that failure or perceived disloyalty meant sudden, swift, and often brutal execution. Loyalty to Cao was rooted in self-interest and respect for his competence, not shared virtue. His court was a high-functioning, high-stakes meritocracy. His own internal monologue must have been an endless calculation, weighing the cost of ruthlessness against the price of political failure. He likely thought, to survive, I must act swiftly and without hesitation. The world will call me a villain, but history will remember the man who unified the North. Cao's realism is still seen today, everywhere the ends are perceived to justify the means. This includes hyper-competitive business environments, disruptive technology launches, or crisis management where difficult, unpopular choices must be made to save the entire enterprise. Cao teaches the necessity of competence and the danger of letting emotion dictate strategy, even if it stains one's reputation in the short term. He successfully introduced the efficiency of legalism into a society steeped in the ineffective ritual of Confucianism, proving that structural stability requires more than just good intentions. The relationship between Liu Bei and his sworn brothers, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, provides a third critical element of strategy in the chaotic times: the unyielding power of absolute personal loyalty, or Yi. The Oath of the Peach Garden is the foundational myth of the novel, the source of Shu Han's spiritual power. The moment itself, set amongst the blooming peach trees, is infused with rich sensory detail. Visually, the scene is bathed in the soft, hopeful pink of the petals, contrasting sharply with the bleak, muddy reality of the world they were swearing to save. The air would be thick with the sweet, brief scent of the blossoms, underscoring the ephemeral nature of their lives, dedicated to a difficult cause. The only sound is the ritual pouring of the wine and the earnest, resonating declarations of eternal brotherhood. This bond, sealed in blood and purpose, was the ultimate psychological asset. For Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, Yi, meaning righteousness, duty, and loyalty, was not merely a moral principle. It was their strategic core. It meant that in battle, they could rely absolutely on the man beside them. Guan Yu's defining characteristic was his rigid adherence to this oath, even when captured by Cao. He accepted Cao's material generosity but refused to pledge loyalty, only agreeing to serve until he learned of Liu Bei's whereabouts. This act, while tactically expedient for Cao, ultimately demonstrated the unbreakable nature of Guan Yu's Yi. Guan Yu's perspective was one of agonizing devotion. His famous inner struggle was not over whether to betray Liu Bei, but how to honor his temporary obligation to Cao without violating his eternal oath. The internal monologue of a warrior like Guan Yu must have centered on the purity of his intent. He likely thought, these gifts are meaningless. This armor is a temporary burden. My soul remains tethered to my brother. I will serve honorably, but the moment I find his signal, I leave everything behind. The ultimate tragic consequence of this absolute loyalty, however, illustrates the inherent paradox of virtue in a chaotic world. Guan Yu's uncompromising pride, stemming from his supreme sense of Yi, ultimately led to his downfall. When he was isolated and captured by Sun Quan's forces, his refusal to compromise or accept a subordinate role sealed his fate. His virtue became his vulnerability, his honor, a strategic liability easily exploited by his enemies. This offers a profound insight from the romance of the Three Kingdoms. Success in the Nan often requires a blend of Liu Bei's moral compass, Cao's practical efficiency, and the strategic flexibility that Guan Yu fatally lacked. If virtue is too rigid, it breaks. If pragmatism is too absolute, it alienates. The rivalry reached its zenith at the Battle of Red Cliffs in the year 208. A conflict that forever solidified the three-way division of China and provided a masterclass in strategic calculation and deception. The immediate backdrop was Cao's seemingly unstoppable ascent. Having defeated his northern rival Yuan Shao at the Battle of Guandu, Cao commanded an immense force. Perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 troops. He controlled the capital, the emperor, and the vast resources of the north. The root cause of the confrontation was Cao's unbridled ambition to unify the entire realm by conquering the southern territories controlled by Sun Quan and the fledgling forces of Liu Bei. Cao's strategy was simple: overwhelming force combined with a favorable claim to legitimacy via the emperor. The immediate mechanism for the Allied victory, orchestrated by Liang for Liu Bei and Zhou Yu for Sun Quan, relied on the classic Sun Tzu principle: war is trickery. They recognized that direct confrontation was impossible. Their plan hinged on three strategic weaknesses in Cao's position. These were the northern troops' lack of experience in naval warfare and the Yangtze River environment, a rampant epidemic that plagued Cao's camps, and, critically, Cao's strategic mistake of chaining his ships together to stabilize them for his seasick northern soldiers, making them an enormous, unified target. The specific visualization of the preparation for the fire attack is a highlight of sensory reconstruction. The air was heavy and damp. The scent of the Yangtze River mud and rotting fish mingled with the stench of the sick camp. Zhou Yu's man Huang Gai prepared his deception, a feigned defection to Cao, offering to bring fire ships. The crucial tactical element was the wind. Liang, utilizing his understanding of meteorology, predicted the sudden shift in the wind direction from north to southeast. This shift would turn Huang Gai's ships into devastating fire arrows aimed directly at Cao's chained fleet. When the fire was launched, the scene was an inferno. The visual spectacle was blinding, a massive, roaring wall of flame devouring the ships, illuminating the night sky like a false dawn. The sounds were overwhelming: the cracking and groaning of burning wood, the horrific screams of thousands of men trapped in the blaze, and the victorious war cries of the Allied forces echoing across the river. The tactile sensation was the intense heat radiating for miles across the water, driving Cao's surviving desperate troops ashore, only to be ambushed by Liu Bei's forces. The short-term effect of Red Cliffs was the permanent establishment of the tripartite division, the Tianxia Sanfen, or the Three Kingdoms division. This ensured that the south would not fall to Cao. The long-term consequence was the shift of China's economic and demographic center of gravity southward, accelerating the development of the Jiangnan region, a crucial foundation for the subsequent southern dynasties. Red Cliffs was the moment when strategy based on moral alignment successfully defeated strategy based on sheer force. It proved that meticulous planning, geographical advantage, psychological manipulation, and opportunistic use of deception could overcome overwhelming numerical superiority. Following the stability established by Red Cliffs, the Three Kingdoms, Wei, Shu-Han, and Wu, embarked on different paths of internal consolidation, each defining governance through their core philosophies. Wei, dominant in the north, doubled down on its pragmatic, legalist model. Its immediate influence was the stabilization of the economy through the Tunshan system, transforming demobilized soldiers and displaced peasants into state tenant farmers. The wide-ranging impact was the creation of a highly centralized, efficient bureaucracy that valued intellectual talent over aristocratic lineage. Wei's sustained evolution focused on institutional continuity, setting the stage for the power grab by the Sima clan, who eventually exploited its bureaucratic structure to overthrow it, founding the Jin dynasty. Wei's legacy is a testament to the power of pragmatic statecraft and efficient resource management in establishing initial stability. Shu-Han, based in the rugged southwest territory of Sichuan, focused on moral integrity and legitimist ambition. Its immediate influence was the establishment of a state governed by the ideal of Ren-de. Liu Bei successfully secured the loyalty of the diverse population through his promise of just rule. The widespread impact of Shu was cultural. It became the moral touchstone for all subsequent generations, representing the purity of the Han ideal even in its physical weakness. The sustained evolution of Shu was a tragic decline, heavily reliant on the singular genius of Zhuge Liang. After Liu Bei's death, Zhuge Liang devoted his life to continuous, strategically ambitious northern campaigns aimed at restoring the Han. Knowing the long-term demographic and resource imbalance favored Wei. His failure illustrates a key lesson: sheer moral will cannot always overcome material deficiency. Wu, governing the rich, geographically secure region of Jiangnan, prioritized regional stability. Its immediate influence was the cultural integration and economic development of the south. Sun Quan leveraged the vast waterways for defense and commerce, focusing on maintaining the delicate balance of power that Red Cliffs had created. The long-term trajectory of Wu was steady, if unspectacular, focused on local affairs and defensive measures, laying the groundwork for the future wealth and cultural importance of southern China during the subsequent Age of Division. However, the period was not simply one of strategic brilliance. It was also a study in the failures of emotional leadership. The Battle of Yiling in the year 221 stands as a harrowing example of how personal revenge can dismantle years of strategic planning. The root cause of Yiling was the earlier execution of Guan Yu by Sun Quan's forces following his capture. This was a profound personal loss for Liu Bei, violating the sacred bond of the Peach Garden Oath. The strategic plan had always rested on the Shu-Wu alliance to keep Wei contained. The immediate catalyst was Liu Bei's overwhelming, grief-fueled need for vengeance. He ignored the counsel of Zhuge Liang and others who understood the long-term strategic necessity of maintaining the Wu alliance. Liu Bei personally led a massive force against Wu, abandoning his strategic mind for a passionate pursuit of personal justice. The human perspective here is one of agonizing conflict. Liu Bei's internal monologue must have been a torrent of loyalty and regret. He likely thought, "My brother, the man who was closer to me than my own flesh, died because of their treachery. If I do not avenge him, what is the meaning of the Peach Garden?" What is the meaning of ye? I know the political price, but the price of dishonor is greater. This emotional calculus led him to a fatal strategic blunder. The short-term effect was a catastrophic defeat. Lu Xun, the brilliant young Wu commander, drew Liu Bei's forces into a prolonged stalemate, forcing them to camp in easily flammable, interconnected positions in the dense forest. When the fire attack came, it destroyed the Shu army, leading to Liu Bei's retreat and subsequent death. A man heartbroken by the failure of his personal campaign. The long-term consequence was the terminal weakening of Shu Han, which never fully recovered its strategic momentum. Yiling serves as the tragic final proof that in the arena of statecraft, cold logic must always supersede personal passion. The very virtue that fueled Liu Bei's ascent became the cause of his greatest failure. A painful lesson in the limits of moral charisma when pitted against calculated strategy. This relentless 60-year competition fundamentally reshaped the infrastructure of Chinese political thought and personal conduct. Beyond the battlefield victories and defeats, the era gave rise to profound strategic wisdom, much of which derives from adapting the classical teachings of Sun Tzu to the realities of political intrigue and resource scarcity. One critical strategic principle emphasized throughout the era is the Sun Tzu axiom that to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. The great strategists of the Three Kingdoms were masters of this non-kinetic engagement. They understood that the highest form of warfare was to defeat the enemy's strategies and alliances, rather than simply destroying their armies. This wisdom is structured around the 5 essential factors of strategic assessment, known as the Wu Shi. The emphasis on moral influence, or the Wei, is particularly relevant to Liu Bei, where the people's support was the core strategic asset. For the strategists of the Three Kingdoms, popular support was not a side benefit. It was a force multiplier, giving the leader resilience that mere brute force could not provide. The importance of method and discipline is strongly evident in Cao's domain. His success against numerically superior rivals like Yuan Shao was due to his absolute control over his logistical systems. Strict military law and the implementation of efficient agricultural policies that ensured his army never starved, even during long campaigns. This focus on internal system stability became a precursor to modern logistical warfare. Another crucial concept that emerges from the study of the Three Kingdoms is the necessary duality of power, the balance between intimacy and strictness. As the ancient texts prescribe, a commander must establish deep familial ties or intimacy with his troops, fostering a sense of shared fate and loyalty. This reflects the intense brotherhood of Liu Bei's circle. However, this intimacy must be strictly guarded by rigid military law or strictness. If the leader is too intimate, the army loses discipline. If too strict, it loses loyalty and affection. The example of General Han Xin, centuries before the Three Kingdoms, employing the tactic of fighting with your back to a river, is a perfect illustration of psychological strategy and discipline. He made his troops believe they had no choice but to fight or drown. This extreme form of psychological motivation relies entirely on the troops' absolute faith in their commander's competence and the rigidity of the discipline that prevents flight. The generals of the Three Kingdoms were constantly testing this precise balance between inspiring trust and demanding obedience. The principle of bide your time, the strategy of waiting, humility, and caution, became a core survival technique for any aspiring power that was not named Cao. Liu Bei himself spent years as a wanderer, serving under various lords, appearing humble and even incompetent. This ensured he did not prematurely trigger the wrath of the superior Cao. His legendary act of dropping the spoon during the thunder was a deliberate performance of weakness, designed to deflect Cao's suspicion and buy time for his own secret strategic development. This strategy of masking one's true ambition, maintaining a low profile, And waiting for the opportune moment is a fundamental teaching of the chaotic times. It highlights the importance of strategic patience over impulsive action, a lesson perpetually relevant in high-stakes political or corporate maneuvering. The very nature of how heroes were assessed in the Three Kingdoms era differed significantly between the fictional narrative and the historical record, providing enduring lessons on judgment and perspective. Luo Guanzhong's Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or the Yanyi, explicitly establishes Shu Han under Liu Bei as the legitimate successor to the Han dynasty. The novel emphasizes the Confucian virtues of benevolence and righteousness, portraying Cao as a necessary but ultimately nefarious villain or cunning hero. This perspective, widely adopted by the public, served a powerful moral purpose to remind the people that virtue should prevail, even if reality often dictates otherwise. The novel is a moral template designed to inspire ethical conduct. However, the official history, Chen Shu's records of the Three Kingdoms or the Sanguaji, and the subsequent commentary by scholars like Wang Fuzhai in the Ming Dynasty, offers a more sobering, nuanced view. This view is based on pragmatic contribution to stability. The historical perspective often views Wei, founded by Cao's son, Cao Pai, as the de facto legitimate dynasty simply because it controlled the demographic and economic heartland and initiated the systemic reforms necessary for reunification. Wang Fuzhai, for instance, criticized both Liu Bei and Cao for falling short of true heroic integrity. He argued that Liu Bei's claim of restoring the Han was contradicted when he attacked the allied Wu forces out of personal vengeance. Similarly, he saw Cao's claim of assisting the Han as a thin veil for his effective usurpation of the emperor's power. Wang Fuzhai reserved his highest praise for figures like Liu Yu, a later general who achieved power based on genuine merit and unified the South before he himself seized the throne. For Wang, the true hero was the one whose public declaration of intent, the Ming Fen or righteous cause, aligned perfectly with their actual actions, the Shi or reality. The core tension here is the clash between moral idealism, Liu Bei's narrative, and historical realism, Cao's legacy. The lesson for us today is not to choose one but to synthesize them. True long-term leadership requires the moral gravity and popular appeal of Liu Bei, combined with the administrative efficiency and decisive action of Cao. A leader who lacks moral grounding will inspire fear but not enduring loyalty. A leader who lacks practical competence will inspire affection but ultimately fail to govern. The strategies and conduct of these historical figures transition seamlessly from the ancient battlefield to the modern office. The wisdom derived from the Nan Shi provides an essential toolbox for contemporary challenges in leadership, negotiation, and personal success. Consider the application of Taoist principles to modern leadership, a philosophy surprisingly present in the actions of the successful Three Kingdoms figures. Taoist leadership emphasizes Wei Wu Wei, the concept of positive non-interference. It suggests that the most effective leader is often the one whose subordinates feel they are achieving success through their own efforts. In the context of the Three Kingdoms, this is seen in the management style of highly capable figures like Zhou Yu or Zhuge Liang, who set the grand strategy but allowed their commanders the autonomy to execute tactical details. A modern CEO applying Wei Wu Wei would delegate effectively, providing necessary resources and clarity of vision, but refraining from micromanagement. The leader cultivates a sense of intrinsic motivation and ownership among their team, leading them by example and encouragement rather than by coercion or constant threat. This stands in contrast to the rigid, fear-based control favored by some aspects of Cao's command structure. Another crucial application is the strategy of shaping your opponent's decision-making process. The ultimate victory, as demonstrated at Red Cliffs, comes not just from anticipating the enemy's move, but from forcing the enemy into a vulnerable position. Cao was lured into chaining his ships because his commanders, suffering from seasickness, felt compelled to take a measure that appeared stable but was strategically fatal. In modern business, this translates to competitive strategy. It means creating a market condition that forces a competitor to make a move that exposes their core weakness, be it their supply chain, their technological reliance, or their inflexible organizational structure. It is the ability to play several moves ahead, using information asymmetry or foreknowledge, to establish a strategic superiority before the battle even begins. For personal conduct and resilience in modern chaotic times, such as the volatile global economy, rapid technological shifts, and political instability, the lesson of bide your time is paramount. We are constantly pressured toward visibility and immediate success. However, the Three Kingdoms heroes teach us the strategic value of patience. There is wisdom in the principle, be modest and prudent, bide your time. This requires rigorous self-cultivation, focusing on internal knowledge, skill acquisition, and resource accumulation rather than chasing immediate external recognition. When in a weak position, like Liu Bei hiding his true ambition, the wise person avoids conflict and makes themselves appear less threatening than they truly are. This inward focus, a dedication to character development and continuous learning, is the real weapon acquired from reading the classics. This dedication to self-improvement connects directly to the military leadership principles concerning the commander's fatal flaws. Sun Tzu warned against the commander who is too reckless, too cowardly, too hasty, or too overly concerned with delicate honor. Each of these flaws is a strategic vulnerability. Guan Yu's demise was driven by an overconcern with his delicate honor and pride, making him inflexible. Zhang Fei's frequent lapses were due to his hasty temper. Liu Bei's great failure at Yiling was driven by an overly passionate response to grievance. Cao's enduring strength lay in his ability to ruthlessly suppress these natural human flaws, prioritizing the objective reality of the situation over his own emotional impulses. The modern implication is that true strategic leadership begins with emotional intelligence and rigorous self-control. Before a leader can master external strategy, they must first master their internal temperament. A leader's failure is often traced not to external circumstance but to an internal defect, a lack of patience, a tendency toward recklessness, or an inability to process failure objectively. The enduring fascination with the romance of the Three Kingdoms stems from its complexity, its refusal to offer easy answers, and its willingness to reveal the human cost of greatness. The narrative forces us to grapple with uncomfortable truths. We cheer for the virtuous Liu Bei, yet we must acknowledge that his success was profoundly contingent upon the brutal pragmatism of his ally, Sun Quan, and the calculated legalism of his ultimate enemy, Cao. We admire the strategic genius of Cao, yet we recoil from the moral price he paid, a price that arguably tainted the political legitimacy of his successors. The text compels us to a multi-layered understanding of history itself. We must read the Yan Yi, or the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, for the moral and human lessons, the power of brotherhood, the tragedy of misplaced loyalty, the necessity of virtue. But we must read the Sanguaji, or the Records of the Three Kingdoms, and its historical commentaries for the cold facts of governance. The population shifts, the economic policies, and the logistical challenges of supporting armies over vast distances. Only by synthesizing the novel's 30% fiction and 70% historical fact can we gain the true measure of the age. The Nan-shi ultimately teaches us that while the chaos of the world may be inevitable, such as the collapse of old systems, the rise of new, disruptive technologies, and the volatility of conflict, the individual's response to that chaos defines their legacy. Strategy is not a checklist of tactics. It is a profound philosophical orientation toward action, a method for creating order in the face of entropy. It requires the moral clarity of Liu Bei, the administrative efficiency of Cao, and the strategic foresight of Zhuge Liang. The final triumph of the Jin dynasty, reunifying China, was achieved not by a figure possessing the moral charisma of Liu Bei or the pioneering ambition of Cao, but by the descendants of Simo Yi, the master survivor and ultimate opportunist who successfully waited for the flaws of both Wei and Shu to exhaust themselves. This quiet, calculating victory serves as the most sobering strategic lesson of all. Sometimes, the greatest strategy is to be the one who simply remains standing when the titans have fallen. As the echoes of the drums of Red Cliffs fade and the final banner of the unified Jin rises over the weary land, we are left with a persistent, profound question. In the eternal struggle between virtue and necessity, does lasting power truly belong to the one who fights the hardest, or to the one who most fully understands the art of waiting?